Good morning. In the interest of time, we're going to get going as a subcommittee, so we're going to start the March 3rd Utilities and Commerce Committee. Audience, please, we're ready to go. We're ready to go. We're going to convene this as a subcommittee, and we have both our authors here, and in the interest of time, we're not going to hold anybody up. And once we have a quorum established, we'll do that at a later point, but we're going to convene as a subcommittee. So the March 3rd UNC committee has been convened as a subcommittee. I want to make a note that Assemblyman Fletcher will not be here today, and there will not be a substitute in his place, so he will be absent from this hearing. Mr. Steinberg, you're ready with SB 1X1? Before you start, let's establish a quorum. I think we have that. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Bradford. Here. Fletcher. Buchanan. Fong. Here. Fuentes. Here. Furutani. Here. Gurrell. Hernandez. Here. Huffman. Knight. Here. Ma. Nastandi. Here. Skinner. Here. Swanson.
Present.
Valadeo.
A quorum has been established, and Senator Steinberg, if you're ready, proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman and members. I'm very happy to be before this committee, to be the opening act for Senator Simitian here in the renewable bill in a few minutes. But this is an important measure as well. We talk a lot about linking education and the economy. And we all know that that is an imperative, and that too often our public policy efforts coexist in silos without that connection really being made. We know that California faces two seemingly disparate challenges that I would argue are connected, and this bill begins to seek to address. We have more than 100,000 students dropping out of high school every year, a number equivalent to the size of the entire populations of the city of Compton or San Mateo. The studies show there are many reasons why young people drop out, but one of them, the surveys and studies show, certainly is that 9th, 10th graders don't always see the relevance between these difficult academic subjects that they're being asked to learn and what it might mean for their lives. Relevance. At the same time, we all know with our ambitious climate change goals and the fact that the renewable energy movement is happening in California and throughout the world, that we need to build the world's best clean energy workforce. 7 of the top 10 clean tech firms in the nation are here in California. This bill is about attempting in a modest way, but maybe the beginning of a larger way, to bridge these two imperatives. The bill taps the Energy Commission's existing Energy Resources Program account, ERPA, for just a modest sum of $8 million to fund 90 California partnership academies in the growing job sectors of clean tech and renewable energy. We are working very cooperatively, and they've been great, I just want to say, with the California Energy Commission to identify whether there might be a different non-general fund funding source for the bill. It may be ERPA. It may be another special fund such as the Renewable Resources Trust Fund. If this bill passes the committee here today, we will work with your staff and the appropriations staff in your House to resolve this issue prior to Appropriations Committee. We use the model of the Career Partnership Academies, which is the best model we have going here in California, to take the idea of career education and to integrate it with core academic work as well. And so we have some experience here. And of course, under the Partnership Academy, at least half the effort and half the academies under the current law must be geared to students who are defined as at risk. But rather than just hear the dry academia about why this works, I think it's important that you hear from a couple of people who are actually on the ground making it work. Jay Gonzalez, who heads up the Partnership Academies for the LA Unified School District, and Eric Johnson, a teacher in the Green Technology Academy at Laguna High School in my district, and he's got quite an impressive demonstration here if the committee will allow it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the time to be able to speak here. My name is Eric Johnson. I do teach at Laguna Creek High School in Elk Grove, and first I teach AP Physics, and those kids are the best in the school, and they can learn in any environment. Those kids, you can give them any teacher, any situation, they're going to learn. But I also teach 3 career technical education courses, and I have at least 70% of my kids are at risk. The Partnership Academy only requires 50%. The at-risk kids, we have stories. If you've followed our progress, we have kids, the attendance issues have gone away. We've got kids that are, the GPAs have shot up. We've got kids going on to 2- and 4-year schools that they're planning that never would have happened before. I think one of the keys to the academy is the hands-on component of the course. In our academy, we look at solar, and I'm going to explain this here in a minute. We build wind turbines that would not fit in this classroom. We build electric vehicles that would not fit through the door. We do biofuel projects that wouldn't smell right in here. So in the senior year, we do senior projects. So there's a lot of things that we do to keep these kids engaged, and it's a hands-on piece, but we don't neglect the academic as well as either. I'm just going to kind of share the solar piece. The kids right here, oh, actually, let me go back. Part of the funding, as an academy, you're required to have like-kind matching from your partners. So if you guys give us $10,000, we've got to get $10,000 from our district and from our partners. Last year, I wrote a grant for just the solar piece for $27,000. SMUD, PG, and Tykert all gave us money for that. And so what we have now is in the district, I'm actually sharing some of this with other schools, and the kids have built these solar suitcases. And if you may, what we have here is a project where the kids learn electrical theory. They learn the cultural component because these things don't stay here in the U.S. We are shipping these overseas to, we have like 5 in Nigeria, we have 4 in Haiti, we have a few in Uganda. And when a kid finishes building this and they find out that their cases are actually being shipped overseas to a humanitarian organization, to a missionary organization, to know that they're actually saving lives, it's a big deal. So there's an international significance to what they're doing in addition to just learning the solar. This simply is, the kids will take actually 4 of these, wire them together, they sit outside, and then they charge this solar suitcase. They learn the electrical theory behind this. Right now, all this thing does is it provides power to lighting. But just to show you this real quick, the lighting that comes in comes from this. But anything you could plug into your car's adapter in your car, you could plug in. So if you want to recharge your laptop, you can do that here. If you want to charge your cell phone, you can do that here. If you want to charge your GPS system, you can do that here. So this system is being built by the kids, and it's a big deal. That significance, the piece that seems to be missing for so many, is actually brought to life here in the academy. One of the other things, we actually do some certification with the kids. The certification is through a company called NCCER. And when the kids are done with these different certifications, they actually have a card that says, I am certified to do X, Y, or Z. The certification that goes with this solar is a card that says once they're certified, they are registered to actually work alongside a professional solar installer. So we actually have curriculum that does that as well. I could sit here and answer questions all day long and talk to you on ad nauseum about this because I'm so excited about it. But you guys have any questions for me?
You're great.
Say a lot here.
Great. Great.
Our next presenter. Thank you for that.
That's great.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, I'm Jay Gonzalez. I'm with Los Angeles Unified School District here in support of Senator Steinberg's bill. We have, at the current time, 71 partnership academies in Los Angeles Unified School District in a variety of industry sectors. We have 9 of the AB 519 Green Academies, which started recently. And then we have a couple of legacy academies in natural resources and other areas related to sustainable and green. There are 2 issues that I think partnership academies, and particularly this bill for green academies, addresses. One is the engagement factor for keeping kids in school, not just keeping them in school and occupying time, but keeping them in school and engaged in things that are of interest to them. I'd like to share one brief story and then talk about some partnerships that we have. This is an engineering academy at one of our high schools. There was a boy who came in 9th grade. He's only the second child in his family to ever go to high school. All the rest of his siblings are in gangs or in prison currently. He's the youngest. So he was growing up into that. and he was participating in gang activity. In the first couple of months of ninth grade, he befriended some kids who were in the engineering academy at the school. He liked what they were doing. He was interested. They were doing some robotics. He got involved. The more he got involved, the less he spent his other time or his free time doing less profitable activities. Ultimately, to make a long story short, he graduated last June and is the first kid in his household to go to college. His whole lion's share of his family are in landscaping business and in what we term mow and blow. He wants to do more than that. Through the engineering academy, he learned CAD and design. So he's getting into landscaping design. He's going to Valley College and taking business and additional design courses so that he can manage his crews that he's planning on having in his business and be able to engage with AB 1882 and our LID ordinance that just passed before Christmas. That is a low-impact development ordinance, which requires that you retain all water on site instead of sending it out to the storm drains, which changes the game when you're talking about landscaping and civil engineering. His last year at school, he was taking 3 AP classes and getting A's in all of them. That's the power that California Partnership Academies have to engage kids. The second thing I'd like to talk about is partnerships. One of our big partners, and has been for a number of years, is Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. Now, we're usually engaged in some form of litigation with each other, but what it doesn't affect is the small but tremendously important relationships that we have with them for teachers and students. For example, 2 years ago in the summer, we had 87 teachers apply for 10 externships at DWP. They worked anywhere from 2 to 8 weeks at DWP, and they all produced model lessons from that experience and took a renewed sense of energy back into their academy work at their schools from that, and a renewed understanding of how the academic principles that they were teaching their students applied in the real world. This was unbelievably transformational. The second thing is we have now developed internship opportunities with DWP for a number of our academies, including the Water and Energy Academy at Sun Valley High School, which is 3 blocks from the Valley Generating Plant. So the kids can walk over there and job shadow and learn how those skills that they're learning in their Water and Energy Academy are applied at DWP. More important, or as important as monetary capital, is intellectual capital and opportunities. And these academies offer that. They give kids the opportunity to engage with their education in ways that they haven't before outside of the classroom. It's relevant, and they now have a renewed sense of what the possibilities are for them beyond school.
Thank you. Members, are there any questions of the presenters?
I move the bill.
It's been moved by Mr. Buchanan. It's been seconded by Mr. Fuatani. Before we get to that, I'm just trying to see if there are any witnesses in support, and if so, let's just be very brief in stating your name, organization, and affirmative.
Mr. Chair, members, Chris Walker on behalf of the California Industrial and Technology Education Association, as well as the California Association of Sheet Metal Air Conditioning Contractors. These are contractors that are primarily involved in forwarding the areas of the new green economy. We support the bill. We thank the author for what he's doing here. A lot has been said about career tech. Not a lot in the end has been done, and our enrollments keep falling every year. So we thank the Senator for the attention he's brought to it and doing something positive to bring funding to these programs. The one thing we would like the Senator to consider is an amendment that would open the eligibility to all high-quality CTE programs that feed green programs, not just partnership academies, but also other high-quality CTE programs in our schools that are funded and supported by industry and would lead to a green job. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Donna Brownsley with the Solar Alliance in support.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, Dan Cobb with Union of Concerned Scientists. As a former staff administrator at a community college, I've had the good fortune of observing many apprenticeship programs and seeing programs that would be similar to this. And when those students graduate from those programs, some of those students just graduate with a GED, others with a high school diploma and the apprenticeship certificate. You see the smile on their face, and because they know that they have the opportunity now to get a job that they actually would enjoy, and to know now that this bill, which would create similar kinds of programs in these academies at the high school level, to help make available for our high school children to learn these new skills that are going to grow in the state. That this is, I think, the best word I can think is awesome. I know awesome is not a very scientific term, but it's a very appropriate term to this bill, and we urge your support.
I like awesome.
Mr. Chairman and members, Aaron Niemela representing the Large Scale Solar Association and the California Energy Efficiency Industry Council in support of the bill.
Mr. Chair and members, Rachel O'Brien on behalf of the California League of Conservation Voters in support. Very excited about this.
Mr. Chair and members, Danielle Osborne Mills with the Clean Power Campaign, also in support of the bill. Thank you.
Valerie Torella, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, in support.
Mr. Chairman and members, Peter Miller with the Natural Resources Defense Council in support of the bill.
Kevin Cook representing Sierra Club, California, and we're in support of the bill.
Good morning, Robin Smutney Jones with the California Energy Commission, very supportive of this measure, and would like to thank the author again for helping us work out the funding source.
Chair, member Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council, also in strong support of career technical education. Thank you.
Scott Wetch on behalf of the Coalition of the California Coalition of Utility Employees, the State Association of Electrical Workers, and the California State Pipe Trades Council in support.
Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. Chris Reef on behalf of State Superintendent of Public Instruction, Tom Torlakson. The superintendent does not have an official position on this measure, but very much thanks the senator for authoring this measure, as well as the co-authors. Has been working very closely with him on this measure and urges the committee to continue the bill and allow it to move forward so that we can continue to allow it to get to the governor's desk. And it is expected that the superintendent will take an official support position soon. Thank you.
Oh, okay. That's the end of our witnesses in support. Witnesses in opposition.
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Dorothy Rothrock. I'm with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and we're very supportive of career and technical education. We've been working hard in this legislature to try to improve the prospects for career and technical education, but we're very concerned about the use of ratepayer funds for this purpose. We think this bill should be funded by education dollars. If it's so important, let's do it that way. We have huge costs coming to us as ratepayers. We're going to hear a bill in just a moment that promises to increase cost to customers. We also have energy efficiency programs. We have cap and trade programs coming down the road. We need to use every single ratepayer dollar for a direct benefit to ratepayers. Thank you.
Thank you. Hearing and seeing no other witnesses in opposition support, members, Mr. Swanson, got a question?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, first of all, let me just thank the author for the bill. It's been too long since the concept of wood shop and auto shop have left the curriculum, and when many students would become automotive technicians and carpenters, this concept is long overdue for returning to the strategies of academic preparation. And so I commend the author for this as we move forward, and it certainly will change the lives of many, many young people and end up supporting many, many families. And so thank you very much, Senator, for the bill.
Thank you, Assemblyman.
Thank you, Mr. Swanson. Mr. Stanley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Senator, I do appreciate and like the idea of the program and the concept, and we do need more career tech, absolutely. But I am not able to support it because of the nexus of the fee to the program. And as the governor stated in his veto last year, that I agree that we have to have a clear path when we're doing fees on taxpayers of where the money is going and what the use of that money will be. And I'm afraid that I can't support that dilution of nexus. But thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Mr. Fultani.
Thank you very much. I want to thank the President Pro Tem for an excellent bill.
it's great to hear and look at the issue of career tech ed take on so many different aspects and facets. The concern I hear about the funding source is appreciated, really. But if you look at the issue of how we're funding CTE, it's a fold out, and we've been studying this, of multiple sources of funding. Some of it's education funding, some of it's Department of Labor, some of it's EDD, some of it's private, some of it's public. We're getting funding from all over. I think a bill like this, focusing on the nexus between this industry that's growing and career tech ed, connects also with the career tech ed issue across the board. I have a bill that we have about getting credit for graduation option for career tech ed, and it's like the person said about keeping people engaged. It's really a great way to look at how to get people's interest. In fact, elevated to the point where they continue to stay in school and they can get a great career going, not just a job, but a career. So I think this is a great start, but we have to get to the point where we look at this all as a part of a career tech education program that pretty much services from K-12 all the way up to higher education. It's a very interesting bill. Thank you very much, President.
Thank you, Mr. Furtani.
Any other members? Okay. Senator Steinberg, I just, too, personally want to thank you for your efforts in this moving forth in career tech and the specific green area. It's one of my greatest concerns that we create a pathway for young folks to find careers outside of being doctors and lawyers and going necessarily to college. We know that's not going to happen. We know with the absence of, as Mr. Swanson says, those industrial shop classes that once existed on the high school level, that this is vitally important to introduce kids who might not necessarily want to go to college, but do like working with their hands and do like working with this technology. And I want to thank you and your staff for willing to work with this committee as well as myself and further defining what a high-risk area is and making sure that they have an opportunity to participate in these grants, some of the high-risk areas in schools, that they are allowed to apply for a grant. And if I were to believe all the statistics as it relates to high school dropout rate in California and this nation, I would be led to believe that the majority of those folks in those seats would be African Americans and Latinos. So I hope that diversity in those classrooms will reflect that as well. So thank you. So we have a motion by Mr. Buchanan, seconded by Mr. Fuatani. It's a due pass on education. And Madam Secretary, call the roll.
Bradford?
Aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher? Buchanan? Buchanan, aye. Fong? Fong, aye. Fuentes? Fuentes, aye. Furutani? Furutani, aye. Gurel? Hernandez?
Aye.
Hernandez, aye. Huffman? Knight?
No.
Knight, no. Ma? Ma, aye. Nastandi? No. Nastandi, no. Skinner? Skinner, aye. Swanson?
Swanson, aye.
Swanson, aye. Valadeo?
No.
Valadeo, no.
Mr. Senator, the bill's out 9-3. Congratulations, and we look forward to working with you.
Thank you very much,
Thank
Mr.
you.
Chairman and members. For good
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
All right, now for the main attraction, and unfortunately, we will not be selling popcorn and candy for this event, but our next on our agenda is SB 2X1 by Senator Simitian, better known as Renewable Portfolio Standards. So, Senator Simitian, when you're ready, you can begin your presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. I want to thank you for the opportunity to present SB 2 today. I think you all know the basic purpose of the bill is pretty simple and straightforward. It's to enact into California law 33% renewable energy procurement mandate for the year 2020 that applies to both public and private utilities. Thank you, Sergeant. And other electricity retail sellers. I think it is important to note that while the bill calls for 33% by 2020, the measure that is before you today, Mr. Chairman, which reflects the input of the Chair and members of this committee and my previous appearances before you, provides significant flexibility, protects ratepayers from excessive rate costs, and creates California-based jobs and revenue-generating facilities that will help the state's economy. On protecting ratepayers from high energy bills due to the costs of renewable energy, the bill now contains language authorizing the PUC to impose cost caps on each utility. This follows up on conversations we had in this committee previously with a previous version of the bill, Mr. Chairman. I remember specifically you raised this issue about cost containment as a concern, and Assemblymember Furtani and I had a good exchange about making sure that the costs were not a concern for people of more modest means. Those cost caps are set to protect against disproportionate rate impacts on various ratepayer classes and has to include all renewable procurement costs as part of the calculation. The question of flexibility came up as well, and I think we've gotten to a very good place there. On the one hand, we want the 33% renewable portfolio standard to be real. On the other hand, folks who have to acquire that energy have reasonably said, well, you can't demand that we acquire energy if it doesn't exist, or if the transmission's not there, or if there are unreasonable delays in permitting and siting. So the flexibility provisions there are now in the bill, consistent with that earlier conversation. One of the biggest changes, and from the measure that was vetoed by the governor, passed by this committee back in 2009, but vetoed by then Governor Schwarzenegger, dealt with the issue of deliverability. And some of you who are veterans of this committee, I know are happy that you'll never have to hear that conversation again. We have a different approach in the bill that seems to have generated broader-based support. We use something now called a product loading order to basically say, this ought to be our primary way of getting there, but here's another way to get here with some additional flexibility, and here's yet a third way to get there with more flexibility still. And just because there's been confusion on this point, I want to be very clear. Nowhere in the bill is there any requirement that any of the energy come from within California. Nowhere in the bill does it say that. It does talk about in-state connections. It does talk about dynamic transfers. It does try in this loading order to make sure that if California ratepayers are paying for the energy, that the benefits are accrued by California ratepayers, things like clean air, tax revenue, and jobs. But nowhere is there a per se requirement that any amount, let alone 25, 50, or 75%, be in-state per se. Theoretically, it could all be an in-state connection or a dynamic transfer, but that issue sort of seems to keep creeping out there, and I want to put that one back in the bottle. The bill grandfathers all renewable resources that were already contracted for or built by a utility as of June 1 last year, so the new limits apply only to energy that is going to be built or approved going forward. And I think I will just close there by saying that we had a number of amendments in the last couple of weeks of session last year, 2010. I'm sure many members of this committee will remember that process, including some that were taken to address concerns on the very last day of session. Ultimately, that meant we came up a little bit short on time. The clock ticked to midnight, and we just ran out of time. So we're back with what is substantially the same as the bill that was in its final form last year. But I think it's good that people had a chance now to look at it. We're not on the last day of session, and I would respectfully ask for an aye vote.
Mr. Fuentes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Again, I want to thank the author for all of the work. It feels like this is, year 3 or 4 now of RPS here. I wanted to get the author's perspective on how the penalties and compliance structure will work, in particular for the municipal-owned utilities. How do you envision sort of the penalties that are sort of levied against either IOUs or POUs, and how are they to be used?
I would commend to the members, and I apologize that you're sort of
quite all right.
Maybe getting my best side back here, Senator.
We'll soon see.
I want to ask you to take a look at page 61, lines 12 through 17 of the bill, and at that place there is specific language about the use of penalties that are collected. It says this is in connection with the publicly owned utilities. It says any penalties collected by the State Air Resources Board pursuant to this article shall be deposited in the Air Pollution Control Fund, and upon appropriation by the legislature shall be expended for reducing emissions of air pollution or greenhouse gases within the same geographic area as the locally publicly owned electric utility. And the balance that we're trying to strike here is the goal, of course, is not to collect penalties. The goal is to have a penalty in place so that people comply. So our first and foremost goal is compliance. If there does have to be a penalty, the notion behind this language is that we want to use those funds to advance some of the goals of the bill itself, so that it doesn't go into, forgive me, the black hole of the state's budget deficit. It gets used for something like clean air or greenhouse gases. And the goal also is to use it in the place where the penalty was paid, because it means that folks there were not getting the benefits of a fully robust renewable energy portfolio. The challenge we've had thus far, and this is an issue to be determined later, I think, is that on the one hand, you want to have that penalty in place to compel compliance, and we want to use the dollars for the right kind of purposes and make sure that those folks are beneficiaries. On the other hand, it doesn't really work very well if I say, Mr. Fuentes, that's a $5 fine. You give me the $5, and I say, Mr. Fuentes, here's your $5 back. That doesn't really serve to generate compliance. So this is an issue that was also raised in the Senate committee. The language is specific at this point with respect to making sure that it goes back to the same geographic area, and with respect to those two uses, more refined than that we have not yet gotten.
Very good. And so, I mean, if you had to take a guess in terms of how that sort of gets refined, do you see that happening in this measure or in a companion measure, or what is sort of the thinking?
I think probably in some sort of a trailer bill that pulls together a few of these outstanding issues. We've talked, and I'm just going to permission to speak freely, Mr. Chairman. We're at a point now where we have, both from a policy standpoint, got a measure that really does balance legitimate competing interests. Folks who are over my shoulder are going to tell you, gee, we wish it were a little more of this, or gee, we wish it were a little more of that. Sometimes those are mutually exclusive, gee, we wishes. But I think we've got a pretty good balance. I also think, candidly, we've got a pretty good balance in terms of support coalescing around the bill. So there is a reluctance to tinker with the bill. There is a commitment on my part and on the part of Senate leadership, and I think Assembly Member Bradford, the chair, has weighed in on this as well. The world of RPS does not come to an end the day there's a signature on this bill, knock wood. That just means we keep the conversation going, and we'll keep working on some of these issues going forward. And my commitment has been that I would continue to be part of that discussion, whether I was an author or whether there was some other author from either house.
Very good. I can certainly appreciate not wanting to unravel sort of what we've got now, and your commitment to look at it in future companion-like legislation is what I'd like to hear, so I appreciate that. Along the same lines, understanding that we're probably not going to deal with this or address it in this legislation, but in the vein of the POU sort of scheme there, you also have the CEC, the Energy Commission, as well as sort of ARB, sort of sharing a relationship in how they deal with compliance with the POUs. Do you see that as something that can be flexible, either choosing either entity? In my opinion, may not be heralded by the folks that I represent, but the ARB seems like the most natural place to have them sort of do all of the compliance. If you're looking for it in the bill here, it's on page 60, section O, it looks like there, where you have the Energy Commission and the ARB sort of sharing the responsibility, the CEC sort of understanding whether compliance has been met or not, and the ARB being the levier of any potential penalties. Again, my wish would be to sort of see that reconciled in one place for two reasons. One, just to make sure that we're actually realizing compliance in a real-time fashion, and the second being so that we don't really let anybody off of the hook and make sure that we're moving as expediently as possible. So I hope that's something that we can work on in the future.
Two observations before I say yes, I'll keep an open mind on that subject. The first observation is, for members who weren't part of the previous debate, there was a strongly held view among the publicly owned utilities that it was not appropriate for them to fall under the purview of the California PUC. So using these entities was, in some respect, an accommodation to those publicly owned utilities who said, we understand we're going to have to follow these new rules, but we're a different creature as publicly owned utilities, and we don't belong under the PUC. So we have done that at essentially their behest, and I think it still works as a policy matter. The second thing is, there was some discussion in this committee previously about that relationship and making sure that, in effect, no one could be double billed, that if folks came up short, that they didn't get whacked upside the head once by the CEC and then whacked upside the head a second time by the folks at the Air Board. That provision is now in the bill to make sure that that doesn't happen. In terms of further discussion about reconciling the two roles, as I said, I'm happy to keep an open mind, and I take your point. I think all of us want to make this as streamlined and accountable as we possibly can.
Very good. And the last question, not relating to the POUs necessarily, but and I apologize, I couldn't find it in the bill, and I hope that you can point my direction here. But when it comes to feed-in tariffs versus sort of using the reverse auction mechanism that the PUC recently has decided, it looks like here you're trying to accomplish what I think we've talked about in the Senate mostly, through other bills is trying to figure out how to find that sweet spot for feed-in tariffs for those projects that are between 0 and 3 megawatts. It seems that, according to the analysis, the measure before us proposes to use a feed-in tariff, which I heard clearly from folks in the Senate that it wasn't dynamic enough to sort of deal with the real-time realities of the marketplace. And I think most of us were sort of happy to see that the PUC devised a different sort of procedure for figuring out rates, and it seems that you've departed from that a little bit. I'm just wondering where that is in the bill and understand how that would sort of synchronize with the PUC decision of December.
I think you're talking about the language that's at page 51 and subsequent pages of the bill, Assembly Member. And this is one of those times when no good deed goes unpunished, perhaps, an effort to try and clarify an issue that was outstanding at the end of the year last year that frankly generated more hubbub after we put the language in. I made the suggestion in the Senate Energy Committee that that we might simply delete that language and then let existing law be existing law on the subject. The chair at that time said, maybe we'll see. And that's where the issue got left. But
Very good.
I indicated then that I was open to that. Again, an effort to step in and clarify what was sort of a little wrinkle at the end of the year last year, and that effort didn't work out quite.
Sure. Again, I'm not rooting for one or the other, just trying to understand the magic behind your ability to sort of use a feed-in tariff, which is something that I failed in trying to accomplish in a bill last year, and wanted to see how you synchronize that with the PUC's efforts. But I will look to future renditions of the bill, and happy to support the measure. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mrs. Skinner.
Thank you. I wanted to first thank our chair for the committee amendments towards the end of session last year that added the cost containment. And Senator Smitty, and you addressed that, but I wanted to just highlight that it was our chair that was the force behind that, and I think that it was a very important addition to the bill and provides, there is, of course, anytime we are changing policy that affects the entire energy system of our state, our economy, there's concern of its what kind of impacts it will have. And while I think that this has been drafted very carefully to try to ensure that costs are not unreasonable, I think that the chair's addition was very, very important to give much more insurance about that. I have a couple questions. I want to first go into the follow-up on Assemblymember Fuentes' remarks about the feed-in tariff. There is one, if you correct me if I'm wrong, but you didn't address this, but I think the only real difference between this document that's before us and the bill that was voted on the Assembly floor on the last day of session is some conformity language on feed-in tariff that makes this bill conform with a feed-in tariff bill that was passed into law and signed by Governor Schwarzenegger also in that session. So in other words, this bill couldn't have reflected that because at that point the Negrete-McLeod bill was not yet law. But since the Negrete-McLeod bill is now law, your bill now has conformity language. Is that correct? Or
I think the easiest way for me to say it is the language that's there is designed to be reflective of current law, as you indicated. In other words, we're not trying to make new law, we're just trying to conform to existing law.
Right. So I thought that was an important because perhaps we may have tweaked it otherwise, but at the moment it needs to be just in conformance with existing law.
This is one of those times when how you say yes matters to people, and we were trying to say yes, and people said, we're not sure we're entirely comfortable with the way you said yes, so we need to keep that in mind.
Okay. Now, another question. You referred to the fact that the bill as stands respects all existing contracts as of, did you say January 1 or June?
We talk about grandfathering in projects that were in place as of June 1.
2010.
2010. You've got some correspondence that says June 10th, and I'm not sure where that date came from, but the date in the bill is actually June 1.
And that is contracts by POUs and IOUs?
Yes.
And but it does not, or I shouldn't say, let me not lead the question. Does it affect contracts of direct access?
Yes, it does. Yeah. Yeah. We've got in all the hubbub, if I could respond a little more fully through the chair, we've got a lot of hubbub about grandfathering, and we've also got a lot of hubbub about banking.
Yes.
And I think it may be helpful if I just say we've attempted to be pretty flexible. And what happened, candidly, from a political standpoint, is we took these amendments trying to respond to concerns that people had raised last day of session. So if you looked at last year's bill, you'd see it was amended on August 31st. And then, politics being politics, people said, that's great. Now it's a new year. What have you done for us lately? And there sort of was a little forgetfulness about some of the significant accommodations and changes that were made at the end of last year. The banking provisions going forward allow folks to bank contracts that are 10 years or longer in terms of provisions. The grandfathering provisions allow them to use contracts that were in place prior to June 1st of 2010, even if they don't meet the current requirements of the bill. So we think we've been pretty small L liberal in terms of accommodating folks who had contracts that were in place and folks who going forward want to be able to bank longer-term contracts as we move forward. You'll hear from witnesses on this subject, I feel sure.
Right. I know there is still some concern by the direct access providers as to whether their contracts and their needs are fully addressed. And I, for one, am committed to, as we go forward, try to address that concern if we find that, in fact, it is still an outstanding issue.
And I'll be happy to respond to concerns that are articulated by witnesses if the chairman would like when that time comes.
I may have an additional question after we have some witnesses, but at the moment I'll stop.
Thank you, Ms. Skinner. Mr. Nastandi.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I'm still working my thoughts and understanding of the bill here, so I appreciate this time to kind of go through it and help shape my opinion. First thought is I wish there was some type of provision in the bill for in-state power, because I'm concerned about this huge effort we go through with AB 32 and the RPS standard and what we put our citizens through as far as the process of getting there, but not having the benefit of the jobs. And so we're making this high standard, and if we import all that power, I really don't get the logic of the process at that point. If we're going to create this high standard, why would we not want to have the benefit of producing the energy, but also producing the jobs? And that's my concern with the issue of AB 32 is we're making it hard to manufacture windmill blades, melting steel, or manufacturing solar panels, which is, so we're driving an industry, driving demand, but we're not getting the benefit of those jobs. So
let me
go
let me share with you how what I think the balance is and why I think it has generated the kind of broad-based support for the most part that it has. On the issue of who benefits, Assemblymember, I'm with you. As I said earlier, my view is if California ratepayers are going to pay for the cost of this energy, I would like to see California ratepayers be the primary beneficiaries. If there is going to be cleaner air, I'd like it to be cleaner in California. If there are going to be jobs and tax revenues and investment dollars, I'd like them to come to this state rather than go to some other state or some other nation. So on the other hand, I was on the one hand, now we're on the other hand. On the other hand, we have some Commerce Clause issues that we have to be careful of in terms of not restraining trade outside the boundaries of the state. And the language of the bill is carefully crafted to address those. That's a difference from the bill that went to Governor Schwarzenegger in 2009 and the bill that's before you today. And The folks who have to produce this, who have to provide this to retail customers have said, if you want us to get to 33% by 2020, you need to give us some flexibility. And it's one thing to say you want us to get it in state, but what if it isn't available in state? What if we have to go out of state to get it? And so what we've done is we've sort of got a rank order where we say the first cluster of energy that we want to be looking at and make as our primary source is stuff that is either in state, directly connected, so it could be out of state, but actually connected with a balancing authority here in California, or energy that is subject to what's known as a dynamic transfer agreement, which is sort of a fancy way of saying that even though you can't put a paint swatch on any particular group of electrons, you actually can manage and watch the movement of a clump of energy from this balancing authority to this balancing authority and into California. So is it real? And to the greatest degree possible, can it be stuff that's either in state, or can it be stuff that is directly connected? To the extent, then those folks say, well, but we need some more flexibility. So we provided that flexibility by allowing for what's known as firmed and shaped product. And we provided for further flexibility by allowing for the use of renewable energy credits. So balancing the desire that you and I have to make sure that the benefits accrue to Californians with both the Commerce Clause issues and the concerns that people articulate about saying, don't ask us to produce 33% and then tie our hands in terms of how do we get there. One other provision, and that is, and this was a little bit confusing, I think, for some folks, buried deep in the bill, there's a provision that talks about 8.25%, which is 25% of the 33%, that the PUC will approve investor-owned utilities generation that would provide for their development, those IOUs actually developing their own sources here in California. That was both to make sure that if there was an inadequate supply, the IOUs would be able to step up and get it done, but also that it would get done here in California. So I think we've and I think, frankly, the history of the last 2 years has been we've seen tremendous growth. If there's a silver lining, Mr. Chairman, to the fact that this bill has taken so darn long, it's that we've had an opportunity over the last couple of years to see the growth in renewables in California and know that the benefits are accruing here in California.
And I'm also understand the argument of the utility saying if it's not there, how are we required to purchase it? And that's why I struggle a little bit with the mandate as opposed to a goal or somewhere we want to get, as opposed to that hard, fast mandate, because, yes, if it's not there, that is a problem.
Well, and we
might drive cost further.
We had an interesting discussion on this point because you referenced the ARB Assembly member. So one of the questions that was asked, I think it was Senator Sharon Runner, said, well, so what happens if the bill doesn't pass? Because Senator Runner was concerned about the economic benefits in her district. And I said, well, if the bill doesn't pass, then you can argue you have the worst of all possible worlds, which is you have duplicative government entities. You have the ARB, who is currently implementing an executive order, while the PUC is currently implementing existing statutory law. The ARB is implementing its executive order based on greenhouse gases, which makes some people in this room a little bit uncomfortable, and they're doing it without any of the cost containment protections that are now in the bill.
Understood, and I appreciate that. I understand the executive order is in place, but I was just saying that the problem with the mandates are the problem that utilities have. But if I can touch on a few more points, I appreciate the study for hydro. I don't know the point of the study. We know the benefits of hydro. It is clean energy, and I just do not get the concept of not accepting a large hydro in this state. On a question for me, the reliability of the grid. When you have a lot of renewables, wind and solar, particularly wind, you want more, I think, standby power. And I think it would be a good process to have more, peaker plants, whatever you want to call them, standby power, to keep that reliability of the grid, because obviously that's a big concern for the people at the ISO that we have that consistent base power. The siting guidelines for CEQA or for the projects. My understanding, if I read it correctly, the CEQA is not affected. There's still that process there for the siting guidelines. So if you can touch on what the benefits would be then of any streamlines of the siting, you really do boil down to CEQA. I mean, I don't know what else you run into when you're siting other than CEQA concerns.
We have we provide flexibility if there are unanticipated delays in siting. So in other words, again, if the investor-owned utilities were at the table, they'd be saying we're willing to do 33%, but please don't ask us to do it if the energy is not available, the transmission is not available, or siting is unreasonably delayed. In the bill, we've got what I would call three modest measures designed to sort of streamline the process. One is the 18-month limitation on certificate of necessity at the PUC that's referenced in the bill. Another is a provision dealing with Fish and Game and expediting their processes. That's in the bill. And then in the very last page or two, there's reference to the allocation of some funds to the PUC.
But I think they're all exempted if there's a CEQA issue.
And
so they become irrelevant, don't they?
They being... well, and then what I started to say is then, meanwhile, we've got Assemblymember V. Manuel Perez, who has the bill on this issue of citing and streamlining that is part of the four-bill package, so that will be coming. And then there are other members who are working on those citing issues as well. But Assemblymember, I've said this before, and I want to say it again. I am with you on the notion, at least I think we're in the same place on the notion. How you get there may be a little different. But we can't say we're for 33% by 2020 and then not get out of the way to make it happen. And there are some small accommodations in the bill here. There are more coming in an assembly vehicle by Assemblymember Perez, and I believe there will be more conversation about that issue as we move forward. And there should be.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Mr. Hernandez.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Simonian, thank you for your years of perseverance and your focus on doing what I think is what conscientious Californians want, what is a responsible thing to do. And I'm also very pleased to see that in the process, many publicly owned and independently owned utility companies have already taken the steps, are meeting the demands, are meeting the benchmarks. But my concern, or at least my curiosity is, as we've seen the empirical data supporting the attainment of these goals, where are we at with measuring or getting a good empirical information as it relates to jobs that were presumed to be coming with the investment and with the infrastructure? Do we have a number? Is there empirical information that speaks to that element, to that benefit, the job creation?
I think I'm going to let others, perhaps among the witnesses, speak to that issue. I think I personally, something where I'm very reluctant to try and put specific numbers on the generation. I think if you've looked at some of the reports and some of the studies, people have very different numbers. I think what you'll hear from folks is that this has been one of the few bright spots economically in the state over the past few years in the aftermath of our 20% by 2010 mandate going back to the legislation I authored in 2006. And it's been, what I think has been heartening is that it hasn't been limited to any one area of the state. So, yes, in urban centers, Silicon Valley where I'm from, but also obviously LA, San Diego, other urban centers. But, geothermal in Imperial and wind in Tehachapi and sun in the high desert and biomass in the Central Valley. I mean, it really has been an opportunity around. That being said, I myself, I'm always a little cautious. I know that the plural of anecdote is not data. I got a lot of anecdotes. I got a lot of reason to feel good about what's happened, but I'm going to let somebody else who does this for a living figure out what number they'd like to give you looking backward. The most conservative estimates that I see looking forward suggest that we're talking about 100,000 jobs. That's the low end in terms of what moving to 33% by 2020 provides. I try to use that more modest number because I don't want to overstate the case.
Right, and just as a point of clarification, it's not my intent that we have a hard and fixed number in terms of jobs and where the jobs are situated geographically. I think it's too difficult to attain that because where there's new industry, we also see a loss of jobs elsewhere, on many, if not most occasions. But my goal is to identify what we have seen looking in the past 3 years in terms of new job creation as it relates to the movement towards increasing the RPS. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great. Mr. Guerrero.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator, thank you for coming here this morning. I share with you the common goal of getting to a higher percentage of renewables in the state of California. I am concerned about the method and the timing, particularly the cost to ratepayers. By example, I have in my district 2 months ago a solar power manufacturer announced that they were going to manufacture their newly designed and developed solar power inverter, not at the corporate headquarters in my district, but in Phoenix, Arizona, in part because of a number of reasons, incentives and cost of doing business in California, but in part because of the utility costs and that's a true irony that that some of the things we're doing are that we as a state claim will attract green jobs, high-tech jobs, are in fact, I think, in some ways pushing these manufacturing jobs, 250 of them in this particular case, to other states. And that's a kind of action that we can't, it's difficult to quantify. For example, the PPIC poll that came out that talked about businesses moving out of California, that said it to a certain extent is a little bit of a phenomenon, would not have captured that, because this wasn't a particular company that was leaving California. They were just opting to create jobs not in California to manufacture their new solar power inverters. It's an irony that I'm not sure we're going to be able to capture to truly quantify and understand when we make this decision on this important piece of public policy. And I understand that you've taken care in the last year to cap fees that ratepayers pay, but they really benefit those that qualify for the CARE program. And the non-CARE folks, the manufacturers, the people that I just described, and so many others, their rates seem to go up exponentially under this design. And I'm nervous about that because this is the worst possible time in the last 3 generations for us to think about adding this incremental cost of business on our job creators trying to stay afloat.
Could I respond
to
this issue, if I may?
And one thing that concerns me too, just to finish it, Senator, is the CARE program is self-certifying, and I think that there's probably a large segment of people that are captured within that category that may not necessarily or should not necessarily be in that group. And so I just wanted to get a response from you.
Mr. Chairman, with your permission, I'd like to ask the Sergeant at Arms pass out a letter from the Division of Ratepayer Advocates dated February 11th. And I want to go back to the comments I made earlier about the work of the chair and dialogue I had a while back with Assemblymember Furutani, and this is the issue that Assemblymember Skinner referenced a few moments ago. I wanted to just read a small portion of the letter of February the 11th from the DRA, the Division of Ratepayer Advocates. It says, the Division of Ratepayer Advocates is the independent consumer advocacy division of the California Public Utilities Commission. DRA's statutory mandate is to obtain the lowest possible rate for utility service consistent with reliable and safe service levels. DRA supports your SB 2. DRA strongly supports the ratepayer protection provisions in this bill, which would limit program costs by establishing a limitation that prevents disproportionate rate impacts, adhering to the least cost and best fit approach, and by requiring sufficient transparency and reporting. DRA is in a different place today than they were when we were here before this committee previously because of these additional ratepayer protections that are now in the bill. TURN, the Utility Reform Network, which is the other sort of statewide group that looks out for utility customers, is also in support of the bill. If you look at page 20 of the bill, there is a requirement that rates be deemed just and reasonable. There is also a requirement at page 35 that project costs be assessed to ensure that they are reasonable and prudent costs before they are borne. The PUC is obliged under the bill to adopt a process for rank order and selection of RPS projects so that it is what we call least cost and best fit. They're also required to adopt a limitation of the cost for procurement expenditures to prevent the kind of disproportionate rate impacts that you referenced. And this is perhaps key, and I maybe should have said this earlier, Mr. Chair. If an IOU hits the cost limitation, then pursuant to the bill, the IOU can suspend procurement unless the procurement can proceed with only de minimis increases. Longer term, though, Assemblymember Grell, I want to make this point. Fossil fuels are finite. The demand is ever growing. The simple, basic market reality is over time, if you've got less and less of something and more demand, fossil fuel prices are going to keep going up. Additionally, we know from our experience over the last decade that the cost of renewables is going down as the technology advances. So fossil fuel prices are headed the wrong way, renewable prices are headed the right way, and perhaps most importantly on the price issue, I remember, because I arrived here, and you think you got it bad, I arrived here in 2001 in time for the energy crisis. So my timing is obviously not good over the course of a decade. But when I got here, the energy crisis was on our laps. And what I learned from that experience was that people who'd been worried about saving a half a penny suddenly discovered California was on the hook for billions and tens of billions, which we are still paying for today because we didn't hedge against price spikes by diversifying our energy portfolio. We have only to look around the globe these last 4 or 5 weeks and remind ourselves we don't ever want to be in a position where we have all of our energy eggs in one basket. We want to be in a place where we've got the kind of diversity in our portfolio that allows us to protect ourselves against market manipulation or unforeseen events around the world.
Fine. Okay, witnesses in support. And I'm sorry, Mr. Fuatani, before we have our witnesses in support, Mr. Fuatani, please.
Thank you very much, Chair and Senator Simitian. I really appreciate the work that you've put into this long haul, and I think it'll be a part of your legacy, candidly, and rightfully so. And the thing I also wanted to acknowledge, Chair, is the work of our chair and committee over these. I've been on the UNC committee for the whole time I've been in the Assembly, and we've been working on this ever since. But Felipe Fuentes and yourself both should be really thanked for the work and the work of your staff. The evolution of this bill has been amazing, and where we are now relative to some of the key issues like guarding ratepayer costs, looking at the issue of where it's going to be produced, how California is going to benefit from it. It's all a perspective issue about policy and vision, which makes it difficult because there's no guarantees. But in terms of looking at that, I think what has finally come out of this and the roles that different people have played, and I know I'm being redundant, and I don't have a big utility bill, so I'm not trying to advance the sale on that. But I want to thank our chairpersons, Felipe Fuentes and Mr. Steve Bradford, and the Republican consultants as well. People have really been working on this for years, and I hope we get it out of the committee. I hope it gets to the governor, and doggone it, I hope it gets signed.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Fuatani. Now for our witnesses in support, and I'm going to ask, as I did in the previous presentation, that you limit your remarks, you state your name, your organization, and without I have a dream speech, let us know where you are.
I'll try to leave the dream part out. I'm Jan Smutney Jones, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. I'm the Executive Director of the Independent Energy Producers. We represent about 80% of the delivered renewable resources here in California. We support this bill. We've been an active participant in it from the beginning. We opposed it in several earlier forums. To put this in perspective, Mr. Chairman, we've been at this now for over 4 years. A historical perspective on that, that's about as long as the United States was in World War II. We have reached some détente on some key issues, and I want to impress upon, this is not a partisan issue. My members are trying to create jobs here in California today. We have billions of dollars invested throughout California in biomass, in solar, in wind, in geothermal, and we're looking to bring more of them here today. Please key in on the concept of portfolio. That's what this is all about, creating a kind of energy mix that we can have here in California using our indigenous resources and creating a local tax base. That's why it's before you. Thank you very much.
Mr. Chairman and members, Scott Wetchell on behalf of the California Coalition of Utility Employees, the State Association of Electrical Workers, the Western States Council of Sheet Metal Workers, and the California State Pipe Trades Council. It's been a long road. Everybody before you has had to compromise and give on any number of issues. We think that this bill is now balanced. We think, to Mr. Nastandi's point, that this is going to develop at least a couple 100,000 jobs in California. One thing that's worth noting since the last time we were before you is that the Cal ISO released its latest figures on what's in the queue for renewable energy projects that's been approved by Cal ISO to go online. And there's approximately 42,900 megawatts of renewable power that's been approved. Projects have been approved for the queue. Of that, I believe 35,300 are proposed projects within the boundaries of the state of California. So we've seen the market respond. And so if you take that plus what is out there in the distributed generation arena, which is probably another 10 to 15,000 megawatts. We actually have enough proposed projects in California to probably double what we're attempting to accomplish through this legislation. So we would urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Next.
Mr. Chair and members, Don Gilbert representing Terra-Gen Power. We support the bill. Very briefly, Terra-Gen's developing the largest wind field in the world in Kern County. Just developing a fraction of it thus far, a fraction of it. The economic impact has been about $1 billion, about 1,000 jobs or so. That's just a fraction of that project. Lastly, with regard to rates, taking off on what the senator said, when you analyze the rate impact of this, you have to include the risk of relying primarily on one commodity. We've already experienced what that risk is. It's basic business sense and economics to diversify your portfolio to hedge against that. Thank you.
Chris Rosa representing Applied Materials in support.
Mr. Chairman, members, Donna Brownsey representing the Solar Alliance. I'm just going to make a couple points based on comments that were made by members. We strongly support the bill. And the Solar Alliance is the PV solar industry. First, we've brought in over $2 billion of private capital in the state since 2005. 5 years ago, there were 2 solar manufacturing plants in the state. Right now, there are between 10 and 15 in the state of California, either in production, being constructed, or in the process of finishing up their financing because they want to be close to our market. That's why this bill is so important. The price of solar panels has been decreased by 50% since 2009, and that has to do with market penetration. And then just lastly, Edison filed with the CPUC in January 250 megawatts of solar contracts. All of them came in under the MPR, so under the market price reference. So what that's showing is that we can be competitive. Rates are coming down. We ask for your support.
Mr. Chair and members, Aaron Niemela representing the Large Scale Solar Association, 13 of the world's largest solar developers and wholesalers. We support the bill. Large Scale has more than 150 projects in this state, mostly in the counties of Kern, Fresno, San Diego, Riverside, Inyo, Imperial, San Joaquin, Tulare, and Kings. Each of those projects creates, on average, more than 500 jobs, and each of them brings in about $1.5 million in tax revenue. This bill is not our ideal, primarily because it's not a mandate. It lets the utilities off the hook for the 20% RPS, and it lets them off the hook, and pardon the phrase, for almost anything under the sun, under the 33% RPS. So it's not as strong as we would like to see. It's much less strong than the Republican governor's executive order, in fact, but it is a bill. It's something that we can wave to Wall Street to get and maintain financing for these very important projects. So we urge your support. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, I'm Laura Wislin with the Union of Concerned Scientists, here today in strong support of SB2X. This bill is a top environmental priority, not only because it will reduce our dependence on fossil fuels and the public health costs and environmental costs that come with that, but also because we believe it will grow a bright spot in our economy, the clean technology sector. As you've heard from many people, this bill is 3 years in the making and reflects carefully considered policies and compromises on cost containment, compliance flexibility, and geographic generation requirements that today a large coalition supports. For this reason, UCS respectfully requests that SB2X be moved through the Assembly without additional amendments in order to secure this all-important basic framework of this policy into law. Thank you.
I'm just going to ask again that if you support, please state that as briefly as possible so we can get all our speakers up here.
Mr. Chairman, my name is Mark Ulrich. I'm the Vice President of Renewables at Southern California Edison. Edison supports this bill as written. It strikes a nice balance. We thank the author, his staff, and all who worked before us. There's already a 33% renewable goal at CARB. We're happy with this bill. It strikes the balance. It gets the uncertainty gone, and it lowers the transaction costs. So we encourage your support today. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, members, and Senator, thank you for all the work that has occurred already on RPS. Jesus Arredondo with the Western Power Trading Forum, over 60 companies working to try and create jobs here in California. We were opposed to the bill in previous iterations, and we are in a support if amended position at this point. Tremendous work has been already engaged to get us to a good spot, and we think we're getting there. We did submit a letter. In the interest of time, I won't go over any of that, but it is submitted. We have some ideas on how this can be a great bill, and we hope that those amendments are considered. Thank you very much.
Hi, Jenna Price with the Planning and Conservation League, and we support the bill. Thank you.
I'll be brief.
Justin Malone with
Audra Hartman with Next Era Energy. We own existing renewable development in the state and are developing new solar and wind facilities. We support the bill.
Justin Malone with the California League of Conservation Voters. We urge the support of the bill without further amendments. Thank you.
Lenny Goldberg representing TURN on behalf of small ratepayers. I will not repeat the very eloquent work that's been done by this committee on cost containment, which is critical to us. I will only add to that we are our confidence in the PUC to maintain this cost containment with the governor's recent appointments has increased substantially. So we expect we will have a very efficiently implemented program.
Kevin Cook representing Sierra Club, California. We just want to state our support for the bill.
Peter Miller, representing the Natural Resource Defense Council. I'm here in strong support of the bill. We urge an aye vote. Thank you.
Melissa Cortez Roth on behalf of the California Wind Energy Association, representing 25 wind energy companies focused on the California market in support.
Diane Fellman, NRG Energy and NRG Solar. We support the bill.
David Shukian, Deputy Director for the Division of Ratepayer Advocates. We support this bill. We're pleased to see the balance of ratepayer protections that are in the bill. We have been working with the PUC. We have a report out on the way they implemented 20% to date. A couple things I wanted to point out. In our report, we indicate that the PUC could be more diligent in how they approve contracts. And even though this bill does have great protections in there, we need to make sure that we work with the PUC to ensure that those protections are carried out. And we certainly believe that the new commission would be much more diligent in that. Thank you very much.
Julie Malinowski-Ball, the California Biomass Energy Alliance. 33 solid fuel biomass power producers located throughout the state support this bill. Thank you.
Cindy Howell with San Diego Gas and Electric. Good morning, Mr. Chair and members. SDG&E supports this bill. It has been an incredible journey, and we appreciate all the work that Senator Smithian has put into resolving a lot of the concerns that we have raised early on. There have been 5 key issues that were critical to have addressed in an RPS program going forward at 33% RPS. Those included grandfathering existing contracts, maintaining the current flexible compliance so that utilities are not on the hook for failures that are not created by the utilities themselves, expanding the eligibility of the resources to include WEC-wide RECs, and that is in the bill. Cost containment is in the bill, and cost containment has been a critical issue for SDG&E, as well as equitable rules for all load-serving entities. So those have been the issues that have been critical to us, and we believe that SB2X is a workable program going forward. SDG&E was the first investor-owned utilities to voluntarily commit to procure toward 33%, and we are in the process of building a 500 kV transmission line that will allow us to access renewable energy from Imperial Valley and provide it to our load center in San Diego. So we are happy to support the bill. There is one clerical issue that we have brought to Senator Smithian's attention and hope to have it resolved in cleanup legislation that allows us to know exactly what the rules are in 2011, given that this bill will take effect in the middle of the year. And we'll look forward to working with you on that. Thank you so much.
Mark Thiessen with the Gualco Group on behalf of AES, Covanta, and LS Development, all in strong support of the bill. Thank you.
Chair and members, Alicia Priega with the California Municipal Utilities Association. CMUA represents over 40 electric publicly owned utilities in the state. We have a support if amended position on the bill. We appreciate the author's office being open to a dialogue with our organization. Several of our local governing boards have already adopted a 33% RPS. However, as the committee analysis noted, existing law has allowed our governing boards to adopt our own RPS targets and dates, and we are fully committed to bringing our local programs into alignment with the statewide policy. However, we are asking amendments for flexibility in the first compliance period and appreciate your consideration of our amendments. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Kira Ross on behalf of the League of California Cities, and we're also supportive of amend, echoing the same concerns that CMUA has issued.
Mr. Chairman, members, Mike Dillon representing the California Association of Sanitation Agencies as well as county sanitation districts of Los Angeles. Our member agencies generate electricity through biogas, and in the case of county sanitation districts of Los Angeles with a big landfill. Thank you.
Mr. Chair and members, I'm Danielle Osborne Mills with the Clean Power Campaign, here in strong support of the bill for the certainty, the much needed certainty that it will bring to the market, and hopefully with that certainty will come hundreds of thousands of jobs in California's most economically depressed communities where we need it the most. Thank you.
And Mr. Chair and members, Bonnie Holmes-Jen with the American Lung Association in California, and I'm very pleased to be here. We strongly support the bill for cleaner air and improved public health, and urge an aye vote.
Mr. Chairman and members, Bob Giroux on behalf of the SunPower Corporation headquartered in Richmond and Ms. Skinner's district. We'd like to also thank Senator Smidian for his hard work and perseverance, and we're in strong support of the bill.
Mr. Chair and members, Cassandra Goff with Calpine, the state's largest renewable energy provider, providing 725 megawatts of geothermal from Lake and Sonoma counties. We're also the state's largest independent power producer, and we are an energy service provider. Safeway is our customer. We are thankful to Senator Smidian for the hard work that he's put into the bill, and particularly to this House, Mr. Chair, you and Assemblymember Skinner, Assemblymember Chesbro, Assemblymember Fuentes were helpful to us last year in getting amendments to the bill, which are still in the bill. We're very supportive of it, and we appreciate the work. We urge that the committee pass this bill. However, we appreciate Assemblymember Skinner raising the direct access issue today. We believe that companies like Calpine and Safeway have demonstrated to this House and the Senate that we are creative thinkers, we are flexible. We would like to continue to work with you all to resolve the issue for direct access customers, and we think there is a solution there, and we realize that will have to be in a trailer bill, but we really want to work with you on that. Having said that, we urge you to vote aye on this bill, and my dream is to get a signature. Thank you.
Chair Member Cesar Diaz on behalf of the State Building and Construction Trades Council. Very happy to sit here and thank everyone for their hard work. It's been 3 years. We finally have a bill that we believe is going to receive a signature, and we view this as the biggest infrastructure and jobs bill since the 06 bond package, and urge your aye vote. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, members, Greg Cook representing the Northern California Power Agency, and we're pleased to offer our support of this legislation. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman and members, Will Gonzalez on behalf of the Sacramento Municipal Utilities District. We are in support, if amended, on the bill. We have one minor, it's not minor, but it's an issue in the bill that we hope will be resolved, and we hope we have commitments to resolve going forward. We have exceeded the 20% by 2010, and in the current bill, we can't count that exceedance, and it's actually a pretty significant rate hit to our ratepayers. So we hope and look forward to working with you in the future to fix that. Thank you.
Thank you. Does that end our witnesses in support? Seeing none, hearing none, now our witnesses in opposition come forward.
Thank you, Chair and members. My name is Dorothy Rothruck with the California Manufacturers and Technology Association, and we believe the rates for industrial customers are already disproportionately high. We have rates at about 11 cents a kilowatt hour compared to other Western states' industrial customers who pay somewhere between 4 and 7 cents a kilowatt hour. Renewables are going to be more expensive, and we think high electricity costs are going to continue to put a damper on manufacturing investment in the state. Between 2007 and 2009, our study shows that while the national average was $1,335 per person in new manufacturing investment, California lands at $235 a person. That's too low. We need to get things going here in California, and we need to keep electricity rates for industry lower.
Mr. Chairman, members, Theo Pejos, representing the Alliance for Retail Energy Markets. We are the association of the state's major electric service providers. We continue to be opposed for reasons that we share with some of the other witnesses. For the sake of brevity, I'm just going to highlight two issues. The first issue, and it's an issue that we try to make distinct from the other issues, is this issue of grandfathering that was brought up earlier, a concern I believe noted by Assemblywoman Skinner. The way the bill currently reads is that it would invalidate some of the contracts that we signed under law that was in effect at that time to meet our RPS goals that were in effect at that time. The June date, it is not June 10, it is June 1. The Senator is correct. The June 1 grandfathering dates are there because it is the date at which the IOUs were given the TREC decision for the investor-owned utilities. That means up until that time, the law read one way, and then after that time, the contracts had to basically fit the same confines that are in this bill. Our TREC decision came down January 13th, 2011. Anything before then was not only authorized by law, but was in fact required by law. We couldn't help that those were two separate decisions. That's just the way the PUC did it. So again, any contract before January 13th of this year was not only authorized by law, but required by it. It is not grandfathered into this bill. So what you're essentially doing, you're going back, retroactive legislating, and you're abrogating contracts that were legally in effect. That is a huge problem for our members because we're talking about numbers that are in the tens of millions. They are too big to simply ignore for our members. And if we can't deal with it in this bill or in a separate bill, obviously they're going to have to seek judicial relief. And then the obligations of our shareholders would then become the obligation of the taxpayers if we were successful. We also have a concern with the banking provisions of the bill. Currently, the bill reads that you have to enter into a 10-year contract to bank any excess procurement forward. It is difficult for us because we don't have a guaranteed rate recovery and a captive rate customer to go into 10-year contracts, but at times it is done. The problem with the 10-year requirement on banking forward is now the seller knows. If you're not entering in a 10-year contract, you're entering into a contract that you need for immediate RPS compliance. That is giving the seller way too much power in that transaction. We believe that the policy objective is a good one, and the Senator and the staff has put in a lot of thought into that, but we think that you can achieve that same policy objective by not being quite so restrictive on the banking forward. So those are the two concerns we'd like to highlight. Again, we have others, but certainly the grandfathering we just see as a straight-out legal issue, and then the forward banking as a policy issue. Thank you.
Good morning, I think, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. Valerie Torella, Pacific Gas and Electric Company, and regrettably we are here opposing, unless amended, this bill. We did testify in 2009 in support, so that is really where we'd like to be, but we don't think that this particular framework provides adequate tools to ensure cost protections for our customers. And indeed, we feel like it does exacerbate the seller's market that can be inherently created by an RPS program. And so we do fear that this will result in higher costs for our customers than are otherwise necessary. We are interested in and more than willing to participate in a cleanup bill process, but we do have a few changes that we would like to see to the program. And one is also related to the TREC decision. We feel that recent decision provides clear and consistent rules that should be carried forward as an easy transition from the 20% to the 33% program. It does have a similar model of the strong, so to speak, in-state, which the author articulated isn't quite in-state, but for shorthand, I'll say that it does have that 75% requirement, but allows flexibility for the rest of the 25%, which we feel is a way to give us, as a procurement entity, additional flexibility. I will just echo the concerns with my colleague Theo Payos on the banking and move on to our final concern, which is on the targets. And what we're required to do in the bill, which is demonstrate reasonable progress, which we fear is an additional accounting mechanism in between targets. It does not recognize the lumpy nature of procurement, where renewables we know don't come online in a linear or consistent fashion. So I think there's a good case to be made that the program has been reformed by improving flexible compliance, creating equal rules for all load-serving entities, and does have a cost containment mechanism. But PG&E's concern is in moving the needle to execute the program for success. So we are demonstrating as a state our leadership not only with 33% renewables, but we're actually claiming success that we can do it. It's been a long road, 4 years, and I think a lot of people are saying it's time. And we understand that. We appreciate the author's commitment to continue the conversation, but do feel that our suggested amendments will help create a successful framework that does help us mitigate and manage costs for our customers.
Mr. Chairman and members, Dominic Damari here on behalf of Safeway and Vaughn's Division in Southern California. We remain opposed to the bill, notwithstanding our absence from the analysis has listed opposition for many of the reasons that have been previously stated. As you heard from prior testimony, particularly from Cassandra Goff from Calpine, Safeway and Calpine have an arrangement that is a direct access arrangement that has benefited both companies greatly and also benefited Safeway customers in allowing Safeway to manage their energy costs in a manner that helps keep grocery prices down here in California. They'd like to continue that work and the innovation that they've engaged in and feel that there may be a few impediments left in this bill that would inhibit that, and have worked with the author's staff and various other staff around the building over these last few weeks and feel positive about the dialogue. Unfortunately, it doesn't appear that, at least in this vehicle, there will be relief, and we look forward to the ongoing dialogue that would continue in other venue and fora around the Capitol as the year progresses. Thank you very much.
As John Larea with the California League of Food Processors. As before, we still remain in opposition to the bill. We feel generally just no matter how you slice this is going to raise rates in our areas, and we are in some of the highest unemployment areas in the state. We think that the state should be focused on not just creating jobs, but also what the cost of creating those jobs are. We feel it would be better a better situation to try and allow our business to expand by eliminating the uncertainty associated with the economic recession and the recovery that we're expecting. On top of that, I haven't seen it addressed here, but the AB 32 is coming our way too, and our members are in the process of analyzing what that's going to cost over this same 10-year period that the RPS is supposed to be initiated, and that is looking to be millions of dollars. We do not see the ability of California to recover over the next 10 years unless we really stop to look at this again. We think this is being much too aggressive. The 20% is probably just fine, and that we should kind of pull back a bit until we actually see some recovery in the state. Thank you.
Kara Bush with the California Grocers Association. We're opposed for the reasons previously stated. Thank you.
Seeing no more witnesses in opposition or support, I'm going to go to Ms. Skinner. I know you have a question, a follow-up question. No? Comments? All right. Okay. All right. Senator Simitian, if you're prepared, you can close and maybe respond to some of the issues that have been raised.
Let me try and very quickly respond to some of the issues. I saw the foreheads furrowing like, gee, all right, what's that? You heard from the folks at PG&E that they had some issues with the requirement to show reasonable progress. Actually, the bill is much more relaxed about this process than it used to be to recognize the so-called lumpiness of delivery. The old approach was to say not only do you have to hit your target, but you have to be at 1% a year. And you have to demonstrate and deliver that 1% a year. And folks in the utility world said, well, you got to understand that it doesn't come in neat little packages of 1% a year. It comes lumpy. We'll get nothing for a while, and then we'll get 3%, and then we'll get nothing for a while, and then we'll get 2%. So we not only have these interim targets now of 2013, 2016, and 2020, but we've said no longer will you be required to deliver that 1% every year. We're going to let you off the hook for that precisely to provide the kind of flexibility that was being described by PG&E. PG&E is objecting to a provision in the bill that simply says when you're there, you have to sort of explain, here's our path on how we're going to get to the number by 2016. So if 25% is required by 2016, show us the path you're going to use. That's all the bill requires. And in fact, the bill specifically prohibits in its statutory language any requirement of interim targets between those 3 dates. So it is much more relaxed or liberal than the existing law is. But I do think you don't want to wait 4 years and then discover, oops, somebody didn't get there because they hadn't laid out a path. That's all that the bill requires with respect to that issue. With respect to the flexibility that people ask for, PG&E among them, all due respect, I think people have perhaps short memories on this one. The existing 20% law, of course, requires 20% by 2010. This bill now kicks the requirement out to 2013 for 20%. So you got 3 more years worth of flexibility just like that built into the bill. That is a huge give, and it's one that was, I thought, reasonable as a balance if we were going to get to 33% by 2020. Not only is there that huge 3-year give, Mr. Chairman, but at the end of session last year, people said, well, you know, that 75% requirement for in-state or directly connected or dynamic transfer energy, that could be a little ambitious. And so the amendments to the bill, which are in this bill today, do in fact say we're going to ramp up over time. We're going to start with that 50% requirement, then go to 65% over a period of years, and then ultimately get to 75%. And oh, by the way, if the PUC finds that that's too daunting, there's a provision to allow it to slip back to 65%. So quite a bit of flexibility in terms of the kinds of energy that it access, and I referenced earlier the various measures for flexibility in terms of siting delay, insufficient product, transmission issues. There's an awful lot there. A little misunderstanding about the banking and the grandfathering that I want to clear up. People are saying, well, this isn't fair. We have to have long-term well, first of all, you can use short-term contracts to get all of your RPS requirement. There is no requirement anywhere in the bill that says you have to have long-term contracts. The complaint is that people say, well, but if we're going to bank it, carry it forward, then they have to be long-term contracts. Well, yeah, that's right, because the goal is to create new renewable energy. And as you heard from some of the generators, absent those long-term contracts, the financing isn't there to create new energy. But let's be very clear. If you had to get to forgive my crude visual aid, if you had to get to 25% by the year 2016, all of that could be short-term contracts, and that would be lawful under the bill. Now, let's say you had some long-term contracts, but not an awful lot. Let's say you were at 27% because you had just 2% in long-term contracts, but the other 25% was all in short-term contracts. Well, guess what? Then you can carry all of that surplus forward, even though 25% was in short-term contracts. You get to carry forward the part that's in long-term contracts, even if it represents less than 10% of your portfolio in this case. So you can carry it forward, even if you have a minuscule amount, because you're using your short-term contracts to get to that number. And then with respect to the comments that Mr. Pejos offered, I want to be very clear about this, members. There isn't anything in the bill that abrogates anybody's existing contracts. Let me say that again. Nothing in the bill abrogates anybody's existing contracts. Nothing in the bill invalidates anybody's existing contracts. The debate here is about whether or not those contracts should count towards the RPS compliance number. That's a legitimate debate to have. But I want to be very clear with you that I would not bring to you a measure that invalidated people's existing contracts. That is not what the bill does. I think I'll stop there before I wear out my welcome, Mr. Chair. The one close I would offer is to say thank you again to everybody who has been part of this process. There are some people who have been extraordinarily patient with me over the years. Some not quite so patient, but helpful nonetheless, and I want to say thank you, and I mean it. We have an opportunity here today to clean up the air, to address climate change, to diversify our portfolio in a way that protects California ratepayers, to actually help on the foreign policy front. Because when whenever we talk about foreign policy, we always seem to be talking about America's energy needs instead of America's interests and values. And however much we disagree about those things sometime, we can all agree that our foreign policy ought to be about American interests and values, not about America's energy needs. And finally, we have the opportunity to add jobs, to create tax revenue, and bring investment dollars to this state. If we send a clear signal to the marketplace, the market will respond as it has in recent years. And those dollars, those jobs, that tax revenue will come to California. If we don't send that signal, they'll go to some other state or some other nation who will be the beneficiary of our failure to act. And I want to underscore the conversation that Assemblymember Nastani and I had. There is a good question here, which is what happens if we don't pass it? Well, then you got two duplicative agencies, the PUC and the ARB, both administering a program. You got a system that is based on greenhouse gases without regard to cost containment, as we have in this bill. I don't think even people who oppose 33% think that's a good idea. So whether you're for 33% or against 33%, I would respectfully request an aye vote on SB 2.
Thank you, Senator. Ms. Skinner.
Excuse me. Thank you, Chairman Bradford. I'd like to move the bill. Second. Thank you. And I have some comments. First, I wanted to just note that for those of us who were on UNC in 2009, yes, in 2009, when there was the bill was sort of split, and we had a Senator Smidian and Assemblymember Krikorian bills. We passed them out. They passed on the floor, but if you recall from that particular UNC meeting, we basically, in contrast to today's, we had the number of people who testified in support was equivalent to the number of people who today testified in opposition. The number of people who testified in opposition then was equivalent to the number of people who testified today in support. So I contrast that because not any comment on our vote, but more the development of the policy and the legislation. Now, clearly, any changes in any piece of legislation can create a position at odds with. It's very, very difficult for a piece of legislation, especially one as complex as this one, to address every single concern of every single stakeholder. But I think I bring out the contrast because I think that this bill in its evolution has much better addressed the concerns of many, many, many more of the stakeholders. Thus, we witness today, and I use the word witness, many, many more witnesses in support of the bill, and witnesses of who represent significant and substantial partners who will be affected directly by the legislation, of course, in addition to all of us ratepayers. So I just wanted to make that a small note. Then I am very committed to, as we move forward, ensuring that our ESPs and our direct access customers are in fact appropriately, their needs are appropriately met. And I think there is some, as always, varying interpretations of whether the bill in its current form does that. And so I think that we will, as time goes forward, be able to better evaluate whether it does or doesn't, but I personally am very committed to addressing those needs if it does not. I also, if we take Safeway as one of our examples of a direct access customer, I think we want to understand that Safeway not only is a direct access customer, but also our largest electricity consumer in the state and our largest employer. And so given that role, and not to indicate that they have somehow their concerns are more legitimate than others who objected, I think we do want to make sure that if in fact this is going to cause some undue harm or unintended harm, that we would address a correction. And I guess I would ask the author if he shares in that commitment.
I do. I can't obviously commit to specific policy positions that are yet to be articulated, but 4+ years into it, I'm not planning to go home and put my feet up anytime soon, Ms. Skinner, and any conversations going forward, wherever the vehicle may come from, whether it's an assembly vehicle, a Senate vehicle, one from a member or the chair of this committee or from the other side, I'm happy to keep having the conversations. I've learned a little over this 4.5-year period, and I'm happy to stay in the mix.
Right. And finally, I just want to note that I am pleased that we are in this place now. I'm happy also that we don't have a clock that will tick because if I remind all of us, we in the Assembly did deliver the legislation on that day. And we got it through, and we did get it to the other house before the clock was ended. So now I suppose we could consider it a do-over, but I just wanted to make that note, and that's why I've moved the bill, and I thank everyone who has worked on it, and go for it.
Amen, Ms. Skinner. Ms. Buchanan.
Thank you very much. I also want to thank you for your work on this bill. Having been a member of this committee since I joined the Assembly, it was a little unnerving a couple years ago when we were asked to pass a bill with the trust that there would be 25 amendments to fix it. And it's really nice to have a bill come before us that's had much more time to bake, has more thought that's gone into it, and isn't one of these, we'll fix it, don't worry, but we all know you never see it again. So I appreciate all the work that's gone into it. I want to thank Senator Bradford and Fuentes, and also Senator Skinner for all, even though she wasn't chair, for all the work she put into it. I'm obviously going to vote for this bill. I supported the others, but I have two concerns, which Assemblymember Skinner, I think, talked about, but I just need to reiterate them. One is that I represent Sacramento Municipal Utility District, and and I don't think when districts or agencies go out and become early adopters. I mean, we passed AB 32 in 2006. It became effective January 1, 2007. I don't think when utility districts become early adopters, they should be penalized. And so I would like to be sure that they do get credit for all the work that they have done to go out and procure and be one of the leading utility districts in the state in terms of their conversion to renewable energies. Because if we do penalize, there's going to be no reason in the future for any industry or any company to go out and be an early adopter. And then I also share the concerns with the direct access, that we make sure that that there aren't limitations there. Having met with some of the large energy consumers recently, that when you have when energy is 30-40% of the input into producing a product, and prices are going up, whether they go up because fossil fuels go up or for whatever reason, that puts a tremendous burden on that company. So to the extent that we make it easier for them to go out and procure renewables and help drive down their costs, I think we should do all we can to make that happen. So, knowing that you're going to continue to work on this, whether it's amendment, which is unlikely, but follow-up legislation, I want to thank you for that and add my support to the bill.
Thank you, Ms. Buchanan. Mr. Swanson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to thank both you and Mr. Fuentes for your leadership on this question. This bill has been a work in progress ever since I've been a member of the Assembly, and so to Senator, thank you for your work on it. I particularly appreciate your concern for ratepayers and the job creation aspect of this, given California's economy. And I would agree with Ms. Buchanan from the standpoint that it has been, an impressive job to be able to juggle all the amendments that have come forward. And so the few amendments that have been suggested today, you could handle those with your pinky. Let me just say that I would hope that, and on your answer to the question about grandfathering in and credit, which you sort of described as a question of a legitimate question of credit. I assume then that there are still ongoing discussions around that question of credit that was raised. Is that correct?
There are. I think that, no, there are.
There are. Okay. Well, thank you. I just wanted that clarification for the record. Thank you, Ms. Senator.
Any other members with comments? Well, before I call for the vote, I too want to recognize Senator Simitian's hard work and commitment here on this issue. I do want to respond to some of the comments that some of the supporters and opposition stated in regards to one being what caused the energy crisis. As an individual who worked at a utility at that time, I don't think it was a lack of a diversified portfolio that caused it. It was a narrowing of those who were able to sell power at that time that caused it. And that's some of the safeguards that we need to make sure exist here today as we move this policy forward. It wasn't a lack of diversity. It was a lack of who could at what time sell power, take power plants offline and all that, and game the market. That was a gaming issue. It wasn't a diversity issue. So I want to be very clear about that. I also want to be clear at the number of 100,000 jobs and making sure that those are not 100,000 part-time jobs only in the construction industry, but sustainable jobs. Just as we talk about sustainable electricity, that we make sure we have sustainable jobs as we try to move California forward and move that unemployment number south. So that's what I'm most troubled by every time I hear this big number being thrown out there. And when Mr. Hernandez asked for some clarification, or we couldn't give that, and we've gone from 0 to 20%, but we yet to have the data to state it has created so many jobs. I would also question the impact on the environment at 20%. What was that number? How much have we reduced greenhouse gases from 0 to 20% of a renewable portfolio, and what that means going forward? So, and I think some of us around this horseshoe and in this room know that answer, and it has somehow been absent in much of the debate that has gone on here. But again, I just want to thank the senator because you've put 4 years of yeoman work into pulling together a very diverse group of individuals, and you've cobbled a piece of legislation together that many believe are being held together by bubble gum, paper clips, Band-Aids, whatever, but you've gotten us here today, and it has to be commended. I do have to express some of my concerns because I clearly understand the objectives of RPS, and I don't think it's a single member of this committee or this legislative body who are against 30% renewable energy. I think we all accept that and embrace that. That train has left the station, and we're all on board. But there are some questions about process and the deliverables of this legislation, because it's a lot of promise here, and we need to find how to measure those deliverables and promises in a real way. And we said we're putting this in a special session to quickly send a signal, but we shouldn't be worried about just sending a signal to out-of-state and sometimes even out-of-country foreign investors who want to do business in California. I think we need to send a signal to those folks who are already in California, those businesses, but most importantly, those ratepayers, and also those unemployed and underemployed individuals in the state of California. Because the biggest debate that I get when I go back into my district, when they say, you're the chair of utilities and we hear about green jobs and yada, 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 where are they? And will they look like me? And so far, those folks who have proposed these jobs, for the most part, don't. And so that's critical. I mean, because that's a hard sell for a lot of us here in the state of California to promise all these jobs but not know where they're going to be and when they're going to come. And as we talk about these venture capitalists, I mean, we shouldn't just be worried about them. But I also want to spin back to some of the concerns that have been raised by folks who say, hey, I'm in the renewable business, but I can't get a PPA. I can't get the utility to return my call, or vice versa. I'm producing a wind project or a solar project, and I can't get this financing. So we just got to make sure it's not a selective audience who gets to play in this promising green economy, this promising green technology, and that all Californians will benefit, and that we're very mindful, most importantly, of ratepayers, because at the end of the day, when you have 51% of Californians struggling to stay in their homes, that means they're struggling to keep the lights on, they're struggling to keep the water going, we're struggling to do all those things that make quality of life necessary. So I will temper my response to that regard, and we have a motion do pass by Ms. Skinner, seconded by Ms. Buchanan. Am I correct? And I would only ask Senator Simitian that those concerns that have been voiced, not only by the supporters, but as the opposition as well, are taken to heart as we move this bill forward. And whether it's a companion bill or next session, that we really, in earnest, sit down and address those concerns from the Safeways, because what does it mean also to our UCs and our Cal States, as we are constantly talking about fighting not to raise tuition, but they have taken some very innovative steps in their energy portfolios, and now in many ways they are being penalized for this. So we got to make sure that the contracting issue has to be looked at. I mean, up to 10 years, not necessarily maybe a hard 5 years. So those things definitely need to be addressed as we go forward. And I would just ask, Senator, that we have your commitment as we move forward in this area.
I'll be on it until the day I walk out the door.
Okay. All right. I hope not that door, though.
No.
Okay. All right. All right. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Do pass to natural resources.
Yeah, do pass to natural resources. Bradford, aye.
Bradford, aye. Fletcher. Buchanan. Buchanan, aye. Fong. Fong, aye. Fuentes. Fuentes, aye. Furutani. Furutani, aye. Gurel. Gurel, no. Hernandez. Hernandez, aye. Huffman. Huffman, aye. Knight. Knight, no. Ma. Ma, aye. Nastandi. Skinner. Skinner, aye. Swanson. Swanson, aye. Valadeo. No. Valadeo, no.
Senator, that's out 10-3. Congratulations. Look forward to working with you. Understanding that we have concluded all the business on the UNC committee today, this committee stands adjourned. Thank you.